Let's go. Let's get it. Let's go. Let's get it. Yo, guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Uh, just finished watching um Backlash 2025. The latest WWE pay per view coming live to you from St. Louis, Missouri. And I gotta say, it was a pretty good one. I was worried about this one because it's a very short build. They only had a couple of weeks because WrestleMania's build was so long. you know, Coming right out of the Royal Rumble. Right out of Elimination Chamber, all the way into like April 20th. You know what I mean? It was so long. So the next pay per view's bill is going to be obviously short. So they went with the predictable. They went with a rivalry that's been going on for 18 years at this point. Randy Orton versus since 2007. Uh, Randy Orton versus John Cena. It's something that you didn't really need a lot of build for. It was just, basically handed to you on a silver platter. These guys got history. In 2013, the last time they unified the two world titles, before Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, was Randy Orton versus John Cena, right? Going, like I said, going all the way back to SummerSlam 2007. So they didn't need a lot of build. And also the other matches didn't need much build. You had Lyra Valkyrian uh, um, going against Becky Lynch. That's a simple story. Becky Lynch turned heel, right? Pat McAfee versus Gunther. You didn't need a lot of build for that. That's a simple story. The Fatal Four Way match: LA Knight, Damian Priest, Solo Sikoa, and not Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu. With that match, you didn't need a lot of build for any of these matches. And Penta versus Dom. Okay, so right off the bat, David is talking about the match. He felt the ending was shit. Damian Priest and LA Knight, one of the one of them should have won the United States Championship. I think so too, David. But the problem is they wanted to further the storyline between Solo Sokoa and Jacob Fatu. Basically, the last two remnants of the Bloodline storyline, and they wanted to introduce, for those that don't know, Jeff Cobb, the former AEW star, has now made his way to the WWE, and he was introduced helping, unbeknownst to him, helping Jacob Fatu score the win against LA Knight. But uh, Damian Priest, Andrew McIntyre, uh, Jacob Fatu is all right, he says. Damian Priest and Drew McIntyre were both taken out after that pit of hell um, in the middle of the match. So that was the basically this match was to further the what fans really want. They want to see this the Samoan werewolf Jacob Fatu turn face. So they're gonna tease it and they're gonna tease it until they finally build it up. Probably going into a major pay per view like SummerSlam. Um, and then we're talking about the men's intercontinental title match. David's talking about thinks Penta should have won. Me, I think Penta should have won as well. Um, you know, Raw on Netflix, January 6, 2025, they introduced Penta um, to the WWE audience. He's been other places like AEW and Mexico and stuff, and they're really building this new luchador branch of WWE with the acquisition of AAA. Um, you know, back in April, so they want to have a face of it. But all they've had Penta do is basically job out. And Dominic Mysterio is already over. Dominic Mysterio doesn't need to win anything. Like, if anything, the whole point of it is to turn Finn Balor to a baby face, right? Somehow Dom and the Judgment Day, JD McDonough, are going to turn on Finn Balor, right? So, and that's what basically this kind of furthered. Like, even though they helped Dom win, it was basically like the story of the first match. The guy helped you win, but at the same time, you're still mad at him because of whatever, because of what happened at WrestleMania. So, what's the point? Just have Penta win, and then of course the other person that helped Dom win was El Grande Americano. Now I get that too, like the Grande Americano versus Penta. Okay, that's cool or whatever, but at the same time, you want to build Penta, Ray Phoenix, uh, El Vikingo. You want to build all these luchadors that you got coming in strong, and by having El Grande Americano, as funny as it might be, go over and just embarrass these guys. It's killing the division. You know what I'm saying? So I give that match a D minus because I agree with David. Why? I mean, why, guy? You know what I'm saying? Like, just Triple H. This was a stupid move. You want to build Penta strong. You don't want to build him weak. And so far, he's been being built as weak as fuck, other than his debut on Raw Netflix. Okay? Now, the women's intercontinental title match, that was good. You know what I mean? They portrayed Lyra as a fighting babyface. They portrayed Becky as a vicious heel. Becky lost, but she's still angry. She's still upset. She's still vengeful. So the feud is going to continue, obviously. So that was a good one. I like that. And as far as the main, the Pat McAfee versus Gunther. Now, I have my reservations about this match. I felt this match was stupid. I feel like, again, Gunther is a vicious heel, and not only do you have him tap out to Jey Uso at WrestleMania, losing the championship, now you have him facing an announcer. You know what I mean? Like, okay, yeah, wrestlers have fought announcers before. Larry Zbyszko versus Scott Hall. Larry Zbyszko versus fucking Lord Steven Regal in 1994, or Michael Cole versus Jerry Lawler. But look at these people. Okay, when Larry Zbyszko, number one, is an ex wrestler, an ex world champion when he fought Scott Hall, right? Or Lord Steven Regal, either one. And Michael Cole fought an over the hill Jerry Lawler. You know what I mean? That doesn't count. But this, you have your ex world champion facing a guy that you built for a almost 2 years, but even more, basically, as a vicious heel facing an announcer. Like, he has to sell for an announcer. You know, like it. The segment that they did on Raw where they made fun of him for tapping out, and he choked out Michael Cole and he choked out Pat McAfee. That was a good segment, but a match with Pat McAfee versus Gunther, like, why? He's an announcer. He's not, and he was not. He's not Jesse the Body Ventura, where he's an ex wrestler, or Larry Zbyszko, where he's an ex wrestler, or um, you know, even Jerry the King Lawler when he would face guys like The Miz, right? When he faced The Miz in 2012 when he had his heart attack. These are ex wrestlers. These are ex world champions, right? Pat McAfee has had a total of what, one match back 5 years ago against Adam Cole in NXT. The guy's an ex football player and a kicker at that. You know what I'm saying? Like, are you kidding me? Like, this guy's it made no sense to me. You know what I mean? What a way to bury your 2024 King of the Ring and this guy you tried to build as a vicious heel. But the match itself, I gotta say, was heavy on the psychology. The whole story of the match basically was that Pat McAfee was getting beat up, and Michael Cole was, ring the bell, ring the bell, ring the bell, like begging the officials to end the match. And Michael Cole even helps Pat McAfee try to win by grabbing Gunther's leg, trying to hold him down. But and then Gunther chokes him out like he's getting all red, his chest and everything. And finally, Gunther chokes him out. He's like in the chokehold for like minutes, and finally he taps out. And then begrudgingly, uh, Gunther shows respect and finally gives Michael Cole and Pat McAfee the minute to get their composure together. I guess that's good. I guess I don't know where this is leading at all, if anywhere, but pretty good story in the match. But to me, the match didn't need to happen at all. Now we get to the main event of the evening, and that is the match that is like 17 years in the making. Like I said, the easy go-to match. It's John Cena versus Randy Orton. John Cena, something we thought we'd never see. John Cena and Randy Orton, The Rock and Austin of their generation, the Hogan and Savage of their generation, the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels of their generation, the Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns of their generation. What Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns are to this generation, uh, Randy Orton and John Cena were to the previous generation. What Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were to my generation, the generation that I grew up watching, which was the new generation, same thing. You know what I mean? Like every generation has these two that have the epic rivalry going on. Every single generation of WWE. Uh, Golden era had Hogan and Savage. New generation had Michaels and Hart. Uh, Attitude era had Rock and Steve Austin. Sometimes The Rock and Triple H. Um, John Cena's generation, the PG generation, or the ruthless aggression generation, they bred into each other. Those two eras, they had Cena and Orton. So you didn't need a lot of build for this. This was in and of itself, and it was a pretty good match. Man, they brutalized each other. Multiple RKO's. The table, they did a table spot. The table hardly didn't break, and you just knew. But see, the problem with this is that again, they've already told you what's going to happen at the end. They already told you that John Cena is going to retire at the end of the year. So you know what to expect already. You know that Randy Orton is going to lose in his hometown, and John Cena has vowed to erase him from history. Him and his whole family, including his grandfather Bob Orton Sr., his father Bob Orton Jr. You know what I mean? Like Barry O, his uncle, all these Ortons that he's not vowed to erase from the scene. But we don't know. We know the Cena's going to win, but we don't know how Cena's going to win. So finally, Randy Orton goes to punt him. Who gets in his way? R-Truth. R-Truth stops Randy Orton from punting him. Cena grabs the belt. He hits Randy Orton. Cena wins. Then Cena gets on the mic and says, "I don't need you fans. What I need is a real challenger." And that's how it ends. So apparently they're going to go the route of R-Truth maybe challenging Cena somewhere down the road. It shouldn't be the next pay-per-view. If they're going to build up R-Truth and John Cena, they need to build it up slowly, maybe to SummerSlam. My only problem with the choice of R-Truth and him being the guy for Cena is like, okay, why? I mean, since R-Truth came back to the WWE in 2009, and even before that, before he left WWE. Like when he was in WWE in 2000, right? As K Quick, right? He was always, R-Truth has always been portrayed in WWE circles as a joke. Like he wins the 24/7 title. He talks about Little Jimmy. He Before that, he rapped. He talks about John Cena was his childhood idol and stuff. He's never been portrayed in any sort of way as a serious contender. Now, in TNA, in the early days of TNA, he was a serious contender. He was a world champion, right? And many people at that time, when he was the NWA champion in TNA and John Cena was the WWE champion, before he came back in 2009, many people said that would be a cool rivalry because R-Truth is an actual rapper, right? R-Truth performed with Tupac. R-Truth has pictures with Tupac. He did shows with Tupac. He was in the rap industry before. Right. David is right. He's a two-time NWA champion in TNA. Okay. I'm not saying that he wasn't serious in TNA. He absolutely was serious in TNA. But in WWE, he wasn't. He never was. Like Vince had, when they brought him back in 2009, they had the opportunity. I think you were watching. We weren't friends then, David. This was way back, years ago. You know what I mean? Like 15 years ago. But when they brought him back, people were saying the rivalry to go to, the go-to rivalry was him and Cena because that was a lot of the comparisons. Because basically what John Cena did was take his gimmick of rapping, of R-Truth's gimmick of rapping, and use it to become famous. You know what I mean? In so many ways, in a lot of different ways. So the comparisons were there, but they never went that route. They always made him a joke. You know what I mean? And the closest he ever sniffed to being in the main event was when he and The Miz teamed up Survivor Series 2011 to take on The Rock and Cena. In Madison Square Garden. So, he's never been portrayed as a serious contender ever in WWE. Like he's always been the butt of a joke. So, how? Maybe he could come out and cut a promo and say, you know what? I've always been a joke, but now I'm here to serious business. John Cena, he was a role model. He got to cut that thing out of Cena being his childhood role model. Like that's bullshit. Like if you're gonna go with that, then nobody's gonna take the rivalry seriously. But he could do it like you were a role model to these kids. The kids loved you, they looked up to you, and you betray them. And now I'm here to say, you know what? You wouldn't be anything without me. You know what I'm saying? My gimmick was the original rapper gimmick. I brought hip hop to wrestling. I was the original rapper gimmick as far as this timeline. I'm not talking about PN News and going back to the early '90s or anything, anything like that, or Man on a Mission, right? Yeah, we're not going any further back than that. But what I'm saying is that could be the gimmick, that could be the storyline going into SummerSlam. But again, even with R-Truth, John Cena has to win. Even with the R-Truth rivalry, John Cena has to win. But once again, John Cena getting help from somebody to defeat his opponent. David is saying John Cena, Batista, and Randy Orton should have debuted at WrestleMania 19. David, John Cena was on a pre-show. The plan was for John Cena to have a battle rap with either Jay-Z or Fabulous. And both Jay-Z and Fabulous, two rappers, everybody, Jay-Z, I'm pretty sure everybody knows Hove, you know what I mean? One of the most famous rappers ever. And Fabulous, pretty famous too, another New York rapper. that was big at that time. Holla back, youngin'. Ooh, ooh. Uh, you know, um, and So Into You, songs like that. And the plan was when the plan was for them to uh, one of them to show up and battle Cena, but plans fell through. Both of them said no. So what they did was WWE, like I said this on the WrestleMania 19 review. Uh, the plan was that, but they neither one showed up. So WWE did the petty thing. They brought out cardboard cutouts of both of them and had John Cena cut battle raps on both of them. Uh, their cardboard cutouts, making them look like losers. You know what I mean? Like that was WWE during the Vince McMahon era. You know, like some real petty bullshit. you know, you know. But yeah, you know, and Randy Orton, I don't know what he was doing uh, around 2003, David. And Batista, I think, was still Deacon Batista. They were planning to. He was Leviathan in OVW, and they planned to bring him in originally as because they planned to split up the Dudleys, right? With the brand split, the Dudleys they were gonna have years before TNA did it. They were gonna have Bubba Ray go on his own and Devon go on his own. And the thing with Devon was gonna be a deacon, wrestling preacher, right? And I mean, Reverend Devon, and Batista was gonna be his deacon. And he was that for a while until Triple H had the idea for Evolution. The Evolution documentary is on YouTube here. Guys, watch that, and they'll talk about how Triple H had, as part of the Ruthless Aggression series, how Triple H had the idea to he wanted to resurrect the image of Ric Flair because he felt like Ric Flair's image was tarnished when he was in WCW the later years, and it was because they had Ric Flair in a mental hospital. They buried him in the desert. Vince Russo shaved his head. His son turned on him for pussy, you know, for his girlfriend, Tori Wilson at the time. You know what I mean? Like Ric Flair was made to look a fool of in the latter years of WCW, and it kind of affected his self-esteem. So when he came to the WWE, it was like he kind of lost his mojo, and Triple H felt like the way to gain that back was to have him be his man. Uh, to be his manager and eventually form a faction Evolution, giving Randy Orton and Batista the rub. Um, it was supposed to be Mark Jindrak too, but eventually they went with Batista. Cut Mark Jindrak uh, out of it. David says, let's be honest, John Cena and Batista should have started in the Attitude Era. I mean, yeah, it would have been better for both their gimmicks, but in reality, though, David, the early Ruthless Aggression era wasn't that different from the Attitude Era all that much. The only thing that was different was that the roster was uh, had ballooned to a crazy size because um, they had to absorb the talent from ECW and WCW. So, and there was no longer that competitive edge of the Monday Night Wars. But no, I disagree with that because even though it would have been better for Cena's gimmick because he did the rapper gimmick, it would have been edgier. Um, it wasn't the time for it. You know what I mean? First of all, there's a couple problems with that. One, he wasn't ready. I think he was in He was still being trained by Rick Bassman at the time. He was in, I think he did wrestle for a while in PWG. I know him and Samoa Joe started their careers. John Cena, in a similar trajectory, and Batista definitely wasn't ready. Batista was kind of like Ruthless Aggression era DDP. He got into the business really late. He learned almost nothing training with with Alpha. You know what I mean? And he definitely wasn't ready. And also at the time, you had The Rock. You only have a couple of slots open for guys. So you had The Rock, Steve Austin, uh, The Undertaker, Kane, McFoley. The Attitude Era was really crowded. So if you bring in guys like Cena and Batista for the Attitude Era, they become mid-carders because what are you going to do with them? You can't put them in the main event because they're not that over. You know what I mean? And plus the aesthetics. The late 90s was all about nu metal, all about bands like Limp Bizkit, bands like Korn, that type of music, that type of aesthetic. Whereas the with the early 2000s was more the hip hop era. Eminem was starting to really blow up, and rap music and shit like that was becoming mainstream. So it was different, and Cena's gimmick was there was the time for that. The Attitude Era wasn't really the time for that. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, it would have been cool, but no, not really. You know, he came in. They came in. That class in OVW came in at the time when they needed that. You know what I mean? When Austin got injured, Rock went to Hollywood. So guys like Brock Lesnar, Batista, Randy Orton, and John Cena all came out of that same OVW class in 2002, and it was their time. Brock got there first just because of his size and his ability of being an NCAA champion, but they all eventually got to where they needed to go to, and they broke in at a time when they needed to break into because those main event slots, those 4 or 5 main event slots, were open. You know what I'm saying? If we saw it in WCW, if you have if the roster is too crowded, then guys who need to get over don't get over. You know what I mean, David? Like the reason why Benoit and Eddie Guerrero and never became main eventers in WCW was because guys like Hogan, guys like Savage, guys like Kevin Nash, they would never step aside. You know what I mean? So you had guys like I said, Booker, Eddie Guerrero, Benoit. These guys should have been main eventers in WCW, especially in 1998, 1999, and they didn't become that because the roster was too crowded. You need guys to die off in order so that it's like life. In this world, you need people to die so that new people can be born. Well, wrestling is similar. You need old characters to die off, either unfortunately passing away in real life, maybe hopefully not, or retiring or stepping down or fading away, going to a different promotion, and new guys to step up. This is how it's done. If that doesn't happen, then guys that have potential will never rise to the top because there's only so many slots that can be filled in the main event positions. So if they were in the Attitude Era, they would have just been mid carders. You know what I mean? Think of the Golden Era. The guys that became stars in the New Generation era, technically, besides uh, Diesel, because he started like in '93. Besides them, they all started in the Golden Era. They were all mid carders in the Golden Era. Shawn Michaels was a mid card in the Golden Era. Bret Hart was a mid card in the Golden Era. Razor Ramon was a mid card in the Golden Era. But why? Because the roster was crowded by the likes of Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, the Ultimate Warrior, and and those guys. So those and Piper, those guys, those old school guys had to go to WCW in order for the new school guys to become the top stars. And the same thing with them. Michaels had to retire. Bret Hart had to go to WCW. Undertaker stayed there, but Undertaker, again, he was the exception because he rose to the main event right away because of his gimmick. You know, what I mean, he was like the Brock, what Brock Lesnar was in the Ruthless Aggression era. Taker was in the Golden era because of his gimmick. He rose to the main event right away, and he beat Hogan within a year of being there. But if you would have had those, my point is, if you would have had those guys in the Attitude Era, they just would have been mid carders. And especially with Russo booking, like in the early part of the Attitude Era, like 1998, 1990, late 97, early 98, and most of 1999, Cena would have been a complete joke. You know what I mean? Like he would have made him into like a fucking PG-13 because before Eminem came out in wrestling and in life in general, the idea of a white rapper was a joke. You know what I mean? So in wrestling, when they would have a white rapper like PG-13, Wolfie Ice, JC Ice, and Wolfie D, it was like a parody. Like it was like Malibu's Most Wanted type shit. Yo, 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 yo. Because that's the way we thought of Caucasian rappers. But because Eminem came out and he changed the landscape and he was successful in the music business, people took him serious. A guy like John Cena could be taken serious in wrestling. You know what I mean? So the time had to be right for that. So I don't agree that that would have been good for Cena in the Attitude Era or Batista necessarily because they weren't ready yet. You know what I mean? It's like saying the guys like Jacob Fatu or Dominic Mysterio or Braun Breaker should be main eventers right now. They're the next generation. They will be there. You know what I'm saying? In 5 years, 10 years, the main events we'll be talking about Braun Breaker versus Jacob Fatu at WrestleMania. We'll be talking about Dominic Mysterio at WrestleManias. We'll be talking about Jacob Fatu's, again, I said him, at WrestleMania. You know what I mean? Like, we'll be talking about these guys at WrestleMania. We'll no longer be talking about probably Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns. We'll no longer be talking about these guys we're talking about right now. They will have cycled out. They will not. They will. There will come a time when they will be veterans. You know what I mean? We'll be talking about Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns in a past tense. Be like, man, Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns, man, their feud went all the way back to 2014, right? You know what I mean? Like history. Right now, we're talking about them in the present tense because they're on top right now. You know what I'm saying? But in the future, we'll be talking about the Dominic Mysterios, the Braun Breakers, and the Jacob Fatus in that way. You know what I mean? That's how wrestling has always worked. The WWE, anyway. Other promotions, they have a hard time. Other promotions, this is why WWE survived and other promotions didn't, because they have a hard time doing that. They have a hard time letting go of the past. They hang on to the past for dear life. TNA had fucking Jeff Jarrett in the main event, their first generation star, Jeff Jarrett, in the main event for years. For years, they had Jeff Jarrett in the main event without cycling him out to another star. And they had the future. They had the futures right there. You know what I'm saying? They had the Samoa Joes, the AJ Styleses, the Christopher Danielses. They had them, but they didn't put them in positions to be in the main event, be the main event focus of the show. You know what I mean? which is why TNA did not make it. They would rather bring in guys that left the WWE and bring them in and put them in the main event right away, like the Kurt Angles, the Christian Cages, and all those guys. Then build up their own native, homegrown talent. Same thing with WCW. Roman Reigns in 2000. I don't know. Wasn't he playing football at that time? Uh, WCW would do the same thing. They had before Hogan came in. Hogan was like, if use this analogy, Kurt Angle in 2006 was to TNA what Hulk Hogan was in 1994 to WCW. Before he came in, Jeff Jarrett was like the Ric Flair. They always use Ric Flair, Ric Flair, Ric Flair, but they never would cycle Ric Flair out to another person other than Sting. And because Sting is a babyface, he needs a heel to work against. They never put any other top heels in his place that were good enough to work with him other than Flair. So by the time Hogan gets there, he takes over everything, and it's like, okay, we just rather bring in a WWE guy to dominate everything. We're gonna keep him on top forever, without using him to build our own homegrown talent. All these promotions are exactly the same that are not WWE. I see AEW doing this right now. You know what I mean? They much rather bring in a ex WWE guy. Let's say Bryan Danielson goes there, John Moxley goes there. They'd much rather have him be the face of the company than using him to build up, other talent, which they do have. That are over with the fans. But if they learn the lessons of history from TNA and WCW, they won't do that. WWE never puts over, to their detriment, because they fucked it up with the invasion storyline. But to me, that was the exception. They should have did it there. But almost never does WWE ever put over a talent from another company at the expense of their own talent. Never. They never do that. And other companies have. And other companies have kept these same people at the top for decades and decades, years and years, and it just doesn't work. Fans get tired of it. You know what I mean? If you're going to be a long time watcher, you want to see different generations. This is the exciting thing. You know what I mean? Like, this is not The Simpsons. This is more like SNL. You know what I mean? Where SNL has different generations of comics. You have your 70s Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi generation, your 80s of Eddie Murphy Piscopo, your 90s of Sandler and Chris Farley, and your 2000s era, and so on and so forth. But I don't know, Roman in 2006. I don't know if that would have fit David again. Roman wasn't ready for that. You know what I mean? Like, he became ready in 2012 when he broke in. He wasn't even, to be honest with you, he wasn't even ready when they put the belt on him. When they gave him his first main event push in 2015, he wasn't even ready. He didn't become ready for main event talent, really, to be able to really draw until like 2020. He was put in there too early. That's what happens when you push a guy too early. He's not ready yet. He doesn't have the experience yet. He suffered the same thing like Diesel. They gave him the early push. He had in the 2014 Royal Rumble, he dominated in the same way that Diesel did in the 94 Royal Rumble. And they felt like, okay, he dominated, so we're ready for him. We're like, put him in there right away. And he, just like with Diesel, he failed because he just wasn't prepared for it. And Kevin Nash, you saw Kevin Nash get better with time in WCW, just like you saw Roman Reigns get better with time after 2020 with the Bloodline storyline. Kevin Nash came into his own with the Wolfpack storyline in '98, and he was ready when he beat Goldberg. And Roman Reigns came into his own with the Bloodline storyline in 2000, from 2020 to 2025. You know what I mean? So he's a classic example of putting somebody in when they were not prepared yet. You know what I mean? Rollins and Moxley, they were prepared. When the Shield broke up in 2014, Rollins and Moxley were prepared. Why? Because Rollins and Moxley had been on the Indies for years and years. Moxley had already made a name for himself in CZW. Seth Rollins, as Tyler Black, had already made a name for himself in Ring of Honor. Roman didn't have that. Again, Roman was like, they made the same mistake twice. Instead of pushing Shawn Michaels, they pushed Diesel. Instead of pushing Seth Rollins, they pushed Roman Reigns. You see what I'm saying? Because of the size. Because Vince McMahon loves big guys. So they made the same mistake twice. And the same mistake got them the same result twice. The fans wanted Rollins. They didn't want Reigns at first. They wanted Michaels. They didn't want Shawn. They didn't want Diesel. So in the end, they had to pivot and go with the guys the fans really wanted in both instances. You know, you know. Now Roman is a seasoned veteran, and because Roman is more athletic and he's less injury prone than Nash. His reign at the top will last longer than Nash's. Did last longer than Nash's. Uh, but he reminds me so much of his push in 2015 reminds me of Kevin Nash's push, 20 years before that. But other than, see, the difference was, other than abandoning ship, like uh, Vince figured out it wasn't working in 1995 and quickly took the belt off Diesel and put it back on Bret Hart. In 2015, he didn't figure that out, and he did the heist of the century, but went back completely to the drawing board with Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 32 and tried to relaunch him again by beating Triple H. Oh, he just needs to beat somebody big, a legend. So they had him beat Triple H and Undertaker back-to-back years, but that wasn't it. He just wasn't connecting with the fans. He wasn't over, right? You need to get a guy. Again, that's like pushing Braun Breaker right now. Sure, wrestling is not real. So can a guy like Braun Breaker defeat a guy like say Seth Rollins defeats Jey Uso, because I think that's what they're building to for the World Heavyweight Championship, right? Jey Uso versus Seth Rollins, right? Say that happens, right? And then say Braun turns on him and Braun becomes World Heavyweight Champion tomorrow, right? And okay, yeah, he's World Heavyweight Champion, but is he ready for that? No, you got to build it slowly. They did it right with Batista in 2005. They did it right with Batista. They built it slowly. The turn with him and Triple H. You can't just do it right off the bat. They're going to that. They're moving to that with Seth Rollins and Braun, right? But you have to do it slowly, David. You can't just, okay, yeah, now he's the champion. Where is it coming from? It's out of nowhere. Like, where is this coming from? You know what I mean? Like, you'll kill a guy like that. He needs to be seasoned. He needs to be a veteran, and when he's ready, it will happen. But you can't do it prematurely, because you're not talking about a guy with years and years of experience. He's relatively new to the business. Yeah, he's over. Same with Jacob Fatu. Yeah, they're over, and fans like them, but you got to give it a chance. You know, It's in wrestling. It's all about when the striking when the iron's hot. If you wait too long, then nobody's gonna care, and people are like, oh well, fuck this, you know. And like, you waited 2 years and nobody cares anymore. Uh, Perfect example of that is John Cena's heel turn. John Cena had two opportunities, 2012 and 2010, to turn heel, and he chose to do. They chose to do neither, and now he's doing it, and it's bombing. He keeps having to try hard. Uh, and I gave other examples of trying too prematurely. Seth Rollins had no business cashing in on. I mean, David. I mean, it was a great storyline. I mean, if you would have went over on Brock Lesnar, the predictables end. We saw what happened at the Royal Rumble. The Rock couldn't even save him. The Rock came out. He tried to get the fans to be a boo, to cheer him, and it just wasn't happening. People didn't like Roman Reigns. The one, honestly, back then in 2015, if you would have told me who was going to be the successful one out of the Shield, I would have said Ambrose, because that was the guy. Ambrose was the guy that everybody was behind back then. I liked Rollins. I thought Rollins was cool. He reminded me of Shawn Michaels, you know. But Vince was Vince was in love with Roman Reigns, and see where it got him. I mean, Roman's years from 2015 to 2020 as a main eventer was the worst years, some of the worst years in WWE history. It wasn't all because of him. I mean, there were other factors in there. The women's evolution, shit like that. Start and stop pushes, things of that nature in the late 2010s. But a lot of it, just like it all wasn't Kevin Nash's fault in '95, right? Or Shawn Michaels' fault in '96. Well, a lot of it was other factors, competition, whatever. But it's going to reflect on the champion. If there's the champion is like in a wrestling promotion, the champion is like the president. We had this discussion with regards to the presidency, and sometimes a good period, a boom period, might not be solely or at all the fault of the president, but he will get the he or well he there's never been a she, but he will get the reward for uh, the success, like a Bill Clinton, like a JFK or whatever. He'll get that reward. But if there's failure, he'll get that blame, like a Jimmy Carter or a Joe Biden, or Donald Trump his first term, especially after COVID. So a WWE champion uh, is similar. You know, he's given that ball to run with, and if the company is successful, he gets the rewards for it. Austin, Hogan, um, Roman the second time around. Um, The Rock when he was on top in 2000. They get the rewards for it. They're like, damn, these guys really drawn. But if that doesn't happen, Roman the first time around, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart to some extent, at least, in the United States in 94 and his first run in 93. If that doesn't happen, they get the blame for it too. Like, they're like, oh, well, then he's the worst drawing WWE champion of all time. Like, if you compare WWE champions to presidents, Diesel is Jimmy Carter. Like, Diesel is Jimmy Carter. Diesel is James Buchanan. Diesel is Herbert Hoover. Diesel is is the worst drawing WWE champion of all time because the business was so down when he was champion. Now, was it his fault entirely? No. Just like it wasn't these presidents' fault. Other factors factor in. Economic factors, competition from other companies, a lot of shit. But they get the blame for it because they're the figurehead. They're the person that represents the entity. In the president's case, the country. In WWE's case, the company. It's not the responsibility, the blame, or the praise falls directly on their shoulders. So Roman Reigns, unfortunately, for one reason or another, was saddled with some of the worst years in WWE history. The difference is that up until very recently, Vince McMahon not being there, the fate of his company was up to the decision of one man, unlike the fate of the country, which is up to an entire electorate of over 1 million people. So, you know what I mean? Like, a smart businessman, like a smart electorate, will see that things aren't going well and they'll switch it around and try to turn it around to a different direction and try to go for a change. Somebody different, somebody ambitious, somebody in wrestling's case with more charisma, or in politics' case with better ideas. You know what I mean? But a stupid person or a stupid electorate, stupid group of people will say, okay, let's keep doing this, what we're doing. And that's the definition of insanity, guys. If the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing you're doing and expecting a different result. That was basically Vince in the late 2010s. and the United States in the early 2020s. I don't care what people say. I'm gonna go with this guy anyway, even though, come on. you know? So anyway, guys, peace. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, David, for contributing. Like I said, it's good to have these healthy debates. I'll open this when I open it to all topics, even wrestling, whatever, life in general, religion, whatever the case may be. Um, we have these debates. We debate vociferously. Sometimes we agree. Sometimes we don't agree. But it's when we don't agree that we come to this consensus like, hey, we're really hashing out the brightest of minds. Like Abraham Lincoln said, the team of rivals. When Abraham Lincoln became the president in 1861, he hired different people with varying opposing degrees, varying opposing degrees of ideas because he wanted He didn't want a unified consensus. He didn't want a yes man administration. He wanted people to disagree with him, to go back and forth with him. To a degree, um, diversity of ideas creates brilliance to a degree. Now, you can't go overboard now because diversity could also create fractionalism. So within reason, diversity and steel sharpens steel. Diversity of ideas allows you to defend your ideas and challenge the ideas of others. Why do you think these college videos of Charlie Kirk or Steven Crowder or Myron Gaines are so popular with people going back and forth debating them? It allows them to. I think a lot of times people want to embarrass other people. They feel like they want to embarrass these naive college students, but at the same time, sometimes it allows them, I suppose, I don't know because I've never done it, but it allows them, supposed to reassure themselves in their particular ideas and ideologies. So it's the same thing with even something as trivial as wrestling. That we have our opinions and we have our ideals and ideologies, and we either change those ideologies because we're presented with different facts, or uh, we those ideologies get reinforced. Peace, guys.